I'm just read a little bit from this book. I haven't read this in a while, and it's kind of random. So, but whatever, we'll roll with it. When my friend called me a month ago, saying that she was thinking about ending it, I imagined us together, squatting on the low end of a seesaw, feet in leather stirrups, fastened down to the floor with big metal bolts, making sure we stayed down. I was behind her, with my arms around her waist, like a motorcycle passenger, while hundreds of things fell on the upper side of the seesaw, pouring down, trying to tip it. Her parents, her dead ancestors, the surgeon that performed gender-affirming surgery on her, hundreds of pounds of trash, especially bad trash, like dirty diapers, hypodermic needles for hormones, hypodermic needles for dope, dog shit bags that ripped open, mice traps with dead mice in them. Can mice be trans? And of course, hundreds of gallons of menstrual fluid, semen, crude oil, spit, diarrhea, Malta Goya, iced coffee, the restaurant grease traps that trans people clean because they can't get other jobs, really just anything that goes down a drain, raining down, trying to tip the seesaw. I don't know why there's Malta Goya, except my friend who tried to get me to kiss his penis when I was 5 years old loved Malta Goya. I'm scared to include this last sentence because I know some people believe that trans people are only trans because of childhood sexual experiences that they could heal from and maybe cis. Hazel started making a film collage of all tropes about trans women from mainstream American movies and found that a recurrent trope, especially from thrillers and horror movies, was that we are crazy traps because bad stuff happened to us when we were kids and not as what made us psychos or murderers in the movies, which is ironic because we are more likely to be murdered than other people, especially if we are Black or brown, and we are more likely to murder ourselves. We are more likely to cling to the floor while the trash pile streams down on the high end of the seesaw. We are more likely to be flung into space, sucked up into the trash chute and gone. The Trans Girl Suicide Museum isn't necessarily a place you go in order to kill yourself, much in the way that people don't necessarily go into an art museum to do art. There is definitely a room in the museum with a seesaw in it, or at least in my museum. Imagine the most normal, sterile, white, high-ceilinged art gallery room you can picture, and then imagine a yellow metal seesaw in the middle of the room. A giant opening over the high end of it, a mechanical cisgendered vagina ready to dump transphobia on you and lift you from your seat on the low end up into quiet. But it's not just that. It's as much spending the hours between 3 and 5 a.m. scrolling through pictures on your external hard drive, looking at your bone structure from when you were a kid and teenager, as it is suicidal ideation. In the horror movie Oculus, there's a haunted mirror that true siblings are trying to destroy because the mirror makes people do bad things. One sibling builds a giant metal spike on a pendulum hitched to the ceiling, prepared to swing down and smash the mirror. But in the final moment when the pendulum comes down, the girl sibling who built the whole device is somehow standing in the way. The mirror protects itself, and she is murdered, penetrated by her own pendulum spike, guts spilling out onto the floor in front of the haunted mirror. Part of gazing at oneself in transphobia, and perhaps in hyper-capitalist individualist consumerism in general, is the myth that looking at yourself heals you, when in fact it might be haunting you, poisoning you, tricking you into disemboweling yourself.
Good grief. Look at all of you. For more years than I care to admit, I have wondered what this would feel like. And I must say I am nervous. I would thank all of you if I could. I would thank everyone I've ever met, but I have quite limited time and quite pressing debts to myself. When I was a very young person looking in the mirror, I always wished for another face. And now I owe so much to it. To my face, I mean. Many children that I have known anyway, they are fascinated by their reflection in a mirror. Do you remember locking eyes with yourself in that way? Do you remember kissing yourself through the mirror? And do you remember what it was that made you feel? Was it awe at the illusion? Or was it anger at always being the first one to lean in for the next kiss? Awe and anger. These are two sides of the same coin. Anger and awe. These are merely two types of flirtation. When I was a very young person looking in the mirror, I detected only the anger, the resentment. As I grew older, I learned to recognize the awe, the worship. I had been praying to myself all along. I had been praying to myself all along for all those hours I spent staring in the mirror. When I was a very young person, looking in the mirror, I wished for another face. And now, I owe so much to it. To my face, I mean. I wouldn't trade my face for the world. It's what got me here. Here, where I am. And there, where I have been. Before, after, and today, I have played God, and woman, and Joan of Arc, and every role in between. I have lived a life in front of all of you, and I hope we have lived it well. Me and the space of mine. Thank you. I am more than just a face, of course. I am also quite clever. There are those who are clever and those who are beautiful. There are a few of us who are a bit of both, or neither. But my mother always told me, if you don't have anything nice to say, whether clever or beautiful, we, all of us here, aspire to effortlessness, no matter how effortful that endeavor may be. We work hard, double time, and we let the effort pass through us like sand through our fingers. And we pass through it. And we breathe through it. What we do here, what we have always done here, is do work. The work of intention. How to attract it, of course. Of course, but crucially, essentially, how to deflect it. How to pass for passerby. Oh, war stories. Oh, war stories. I have more than a few. But to board a subway trip and ride the way a person who rides the subway trip rides. That is the battle. That is the war. Of course, when I was younger, the eye-catching would often make leaving the house a trial. I experimented with hats, with sunglasses, for direct eye contact would make me faint or vomit. I began to conduct more elaborate experiments. You see, my cleverness excites me the most when I am clever about my beauty. For instance, being beautiful is a strength, but at the same time, it is a weakness, eh? One month, I dirtied my face, and I wore pants for 9 whole days. And as a result, I moved around and through as a handsome young man, rather than as a beautiful ingenue. I went to the museum with my backpack. Inside my backpack was a complete security guard uniform. I entered the galleries with a ticket. Inside, I changed into my uniform in the men's restroom. And then, I growled. I barked. I gave direction. I used a walkie-talkie. No walkie-talkie. Nobody said, hey, don't I know you from somewhere? Of course, when my face is clean and I wear my own clothes, my status, my trajectory does tend to deny me certain pleasures, of course. If I were normal, I could go swimming and eat corn dogs. Simple pleasures, really, but aren't those the dearest? I wish I could go swimming, but I don't wish to be a nobody. What do I wish? I wish to nourish those parts of me that are warm, and to share those parts of myself with the world, with as many others as will share. Of course, the longer I stay here, the colder it gets. Sometimes what's warm and alive feels invaded, unsafe against the necrophilic bleed. My quest for warmth and my vivacious personality have often led to campaigns against me. Narrowed eyes, venomous whispers. They say I am a fraud. They say I am who I am when it's convenient. You don't need to lie, to try and protect me. I hear them. To them I say, if there is anything incongruous or creative about me, it is not that I am fraud. It is that I am original. Style has always been suspect. Style has always been suspect. Style has always been. Style has always been. Style has always. Excuse me. Lately, I often find myself zooming off to nowhere, even in the middle of what can be a very emotional, a very charged delivery. I can be nowhere, and right here, at the exact same time. You may not believe me, but do. I am absent. And in those moments, I feel nothing. Neither anger nor awe. Certainly not glee or rage. These days, glee? Where to store it? Rage? Where to channel it? Glee? Rage? These days?
This is the rhythm of the night, oh yeah. The rhythm of the night. This is the rhythm of my life, oh yeah. The rhythm of my life.
And in both of them, there's parts that I found really funny. And I imagine that you've watched them with other people before and gotten to notice the parts where other people laugh. And I wondered about when you were making them, if you felt like you were making a joke that then landed or didn't land when other people saw it, or if you felt like where your humor wasn't a thing was where other people found it, but the other way around.
Yeah, I feel like there weren't like punchlines per se, but there were things that I found funny in like building characters, like the second woman, the Oscar award winner. Just like every time I hear myself say "what," like like that makes me laugh. Like it's probably not like a joke, but it is like intended to be funny. And this was actually the first time I sat with other people to watch the first one, so that was kind of interesting to kind of track where the laughs were. Like there's a handful of lines that I like kind of just wrote and then recorded like very solitary, and I haven't necessarily like had enough time to digest that video to think of it as one mood or another. So it's interesting to be like, oh, that was funny. So that felt kind of, I guess, good to just be able to like hook onto some kind of reaction. Yeah. Do you feel like there's a sense of humor in your book that like was more throughout, or that has like nuggets that you like plan to?
I feel like what you said resonates with me. Like I don't experience myself to be like writing punchlines or being like, this is the part where I'm gonna get the laugh. When a childhood friend of mine, like my like best friend from high school, who's kind of like a guy's guy, read the book, I was really nervous and I was like, what do you think about it? And he was like, it's just so funny. But I think that that would will. But then like reading it out loud, or I'm also reading other writing out loud since then, I've been like, oh, there are these moments where people consistently laugh. And there's like a I think especially if you're writing about things that are kind of like fucked up or like depressing or painful to think about, it is reassuring in this way to be like, oh yeah, also like there's something about the voice or the way the thing is being told or how it's being portrayed that sort of like has like a kind of like sparkle of humor in it, and I really felt that in both of these videos, that I was like, you're playing in a way, even though also there's like some stuff in it that's kind of raw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it's like one thing I was thinking about on this rewatch was how distanced the everyday version of me is from those two narrators or the like monologuists in each one. Because they're like these really huge like diva characters, and maybe they're more akin to the mode I snap into when I'm doing drag or performing or something, but they're not really that. They don't talk like linear process feelings necessarily like I do, even though those are my feelings just like ultra refracted, like they're like 6 panes of glass or something.
Totally.
And then when you were reading yours, it's such a contrast because yours has direct references to like yourself and like dates and times and people and places and stuff like that. Like, it would feel to me almost too scary to like, commit to that kind of like one-to-one. Personally, like I needed to create this like really grand, like delusional diva character to be able to maybe, yeah, just like process whatever it was that I was trying to process.
Yeah. Well, that was something that I also struck me when I watched the videos for the first time, was how interpersonally I find you to be like extremely like sensitive and attuned, and like it's part of why I like being friends with you. And it was really, I was like struck by the fact that both of the characters you created in these videos are these sort of like grandiose divas who are like, and at least in the second one, sort of explicitly being cringed at in the thing for being, you know, maybe for being trans, but also just for being kind of like
Monster.
and I think this was something we talked about a little bit. I think there's like, it's like a specter of, and this is like whatever this thing to say, but it's something I think about with trans femininity, that there is like this, it's almost like a trope, maybe like underdeveloped, but still one like I think about an experience of this like trans woman who like takes up so much space and so much attention and is like so focused on herself. And I was like, oh, it's like, you just described this thing of me being like having written this thing that's like exactly in my experience moment to moment and like each feeling in real time, and you having refracted it. But I think in both cases, there is this sort of like figure of this like person who's completely obsessed with herself and like can't think about another person's experience, can't do perspective taking, can't like hold what's going on in the whole room or something. Which is like for me, it's like a scary idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it feel, for me, I guess it feels a little bit tied to like the earliest days of transition where it really did feel like I couldn't think about anything else. And like especially, I guess the Cinderella type, the humble Haughty Child text is written more recently, but the second one that y'all saw was written in 2019, so there's like a huge time lapse for me of how I felt about looking at myself and being looked at then versus now.
Right.
And so it took, a certain amount of time to rehearse it, shoot it, edit it, whatever, and so now it's like actually done, but I am not necessarily like in the same place I was when I wrote it or something. I do feel like, yeah, at that time I did feel obsessed with myself, and also I felt worried about being too obsessed with myself. But I think it kind of like starts to evolve.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It does seem like it's like a developmental arc or something. Or in the way that like little kids are really obsessed with their own experience. It's like you go through it. I think it's interesting also in like you achievement that then you created an audience in the video to be reacting to you. And to like, I think also in a way for me when I was watching it, like to interpret the viewer. Or I was like, oh, am I the two people sitting on the couch having this like whatever experience I'm having?
Right. Yeah, and I guess I hadn't thought like the emotional responses we were having to me on the TV weren't necessarily choreographed. So until you put the word cringe to it, I haven't necessarily found that word myself, but that is what we're doing to me, which is maybe something I need to prepare for next week. But it is, yeah, I don't necessarily want to like telegraph the viewer you should also be cringing, but that was one of the last maybe refraction devices. Like I had tried to make the video work with just the Oscar speech, and I was like, this is not like clicking, like it's losing my attention. It doesn't feel like it's in a place. So then I was like, let's put it literally in a place, like on a TV in a room, and then that will like solve that. But then it did become this thing of like, yeah, kind of mocking the original character. Yeah, which also has something to do with the time lapse effect of like I had already made the Oscar video, and then when I added the couch video, it was kind of like maybe I was already cringing at that part of myself a little, the grandiosity or whatever.
Totally, and putting yourself in to be like, wow, this is this thing. There's a moment where the two characters lean in and their eyes get really big. that I was curious about, but you just said that it wasn't choreographed.
The reactions weren't in the edit. I kind of chose
I
what
see.
to put where, but a lot of it was more going off of some feeling of what would make it interesting to watch, less less than what should I be feeling about the character in that moment. It's more about drawing the viewer in by having something else to look at.
Sure. So they weren't leaning in particularly for the description of public transportation use because we're this is
not necessarily, exactly. Even though that's your experience of it, it's rock on. I mean, it is at a moment, I added more reactions when the, Academy awardee is getting more and more preposterous, kind of. I feel like that was when I added more. Because otherwise it is kind of alienating for too young. Especially extremes about riding a subway train.
Will you talk about that part? Or I think that with this thing about being looked at and then obsession with and horror of and excitement about being looked at is so whatever deep trans trope, and then also is I think treated really in Haughty Child as well. There's this thing of being looked at and being fetishized by this director and the feet and stuff. But I think the moment where you were describing the public transportation, I wondered what your process was like when you were writing that and what was going on for you.
Well, something I noticed this time is that I also invoke a museum, which is kind of crazy that we both, it's, for me, I mean, it's much less fleshed out. The architecture museum is less important in mind than the fact that people would respond to me in disguise in some sense. And so I think I was trying, that section about riding the train and wearing pants for 9 days and cosplaying as a security guard successfully it's a whole bunch of mixed metaphors, but I guess it's first of all, this character is a famous woman who then is interested not only in looking like a man in public, which is kind of cross-dressing or transy or whatever, but also she wants to look like a normal guy. She wants to just look like a security guard in a museum. So there's a class or status thing as well, where she wants to be unrecognizable. And I guess at the time, I was thinking so much about passing and was segueing in my life from, specifically coming from drag and queer club stuff. It was I want to be looked at, I want to be looked at, I want to be looked at. Me and Brittany doing twin looks and showing up to the club with pig noses on or whatever to be ooh, attention. And then once I was day-to-day trans, it shifted for me to being well, how do I not get looked at? How do I avoid detection and kind of just become another person in the world, which was, I don't know, kind of felt like a big psychic shift or something. Being afraid that I would look like everyone else, to really desperately wanting to look like everyone else. And so finding that kind of boundary between a movie star and everyday guy on the subway, even though it wasn't in the same gender direction that I was trying to achieve, it felt right. And also the saddest thing also as this the club kid who's I am the queen, king, prince, whatever, instead of being no, I just want to be a girl. I just want to be around and for people to not really pause on me in a crowd or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I think that part makes me think also of this idea of effort and the effort you expend to be beautiful and the effort you expend to pass. And it was very striking to me, the idea of a cis woman actor accepting an award and declaring, talking about this idea of effort as a metaphor for talking about trans femininity.
Yeah, which could be I don't know. It could be icky to be using acting as a metaphor for transes. But, it's I don't know.
Well, it's, I think when I was thinking about it, was less acting and more about using being cis as a metaphor for trans, or being a woman as a metaphor for being a trans woman, which is it's full on.
It's already spending a lot of effort and then covering it up. Yeah, there's this Andy Warhol quote from the philosophy of Andy Warhol where he has this whole long chunk about female impersonators, and he's talking about how it's less about drawing on the signs of femininity than it is about erasing all the signs of masculinity first. And I read that in like 2016. It's like really like haunted me ever since, because it's like, yeah, it's like a terrible little earworm that's in there. But I guess there's something about if you can like scrub away the masculinity, maybe you could get to some sort of like neutral femininity, but then, oh fuck, there's still all this like maintenance or like kind of, I don't know, like art, there's so much artifice to just that set of institutions. Like
Right.
once you're just trying to be a woman anyway.
Right. Yeah, and then the feeling of wanting to be like the most beautiful one in the room,
Yeah.
the greatest, or like the most special, as a way of also covering or defending for like the indignity of the whole situation to begin with. Or something.
Yeah, or like you're feeling maybe like ridiculous for daring to try to scrub away the masculinity and bring back the femininity or whatever. And so yeah, then that, yeah, I think indignity is a really good term for like the moment that maybe feeling of embarrassment or shame or something tips over into like power or rage or like performance almost, where it's like gets turned back to everyone else in this way, the way that you've been maybe punishing yourself or holding yourself to like this harsh standard.
Totally. I'm thinking about awe and anger, and I was laughing about that during the video, but then I also, one of my associations when I was kind of like thinking what it was, I was like, well, that's also like the kind of the experience of someone like clocking a trans person and feeling like like the tinge of eroticism, and then also like the like frustration and disgust. And I was like, oh yeah, the awe and anger.
Yeah, there's like that dichotomy, and then there's the glee and the rage, and like I feel like they're different, but like maybe one is for the looker and one is for the like that. Yeah.
You mentioned Club Kid earlier, and I said this to you before this conversation, I don't have like a very good academic understanding of dance, but I do spend a lot of time in nightclubs. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about that in the second video, especially when I became both of them. There's this sort of like thing about dancing socially or dancing like you would in a room with other people, and then what it means to sort of dance as an art form or as a creative practice more carefully or something.
Yeah, because the end of the second one has like straight up like, I mean it was semi-choreographed, but it is supposed to look like social dancing or like club dancing. I guess my first association with that is the first video I enlisted Hirogo Tamano, who's a Buto teacher, to help me put together the movement vocabulary of it, and it was like this. It was a very difficult process to like get the concepts I wanted to kind of portray with the narrative of the video and with the kind of overall project relating to transition, and then trying to break that down into sensations or concrete like images, which is what Buto uses as like fodder for dance. Like it's not, as opposed to choreographing like your left foot goes here and your right hand goes here, whatever. It's like first you're a tree and then you become on fire or whatever, you know, as an example. And so a lot of the language I used ended up being like really like ceramics related, like being clay and then turning into like a pot or turning into a brick or like feeling the flames and stuff like that. And so that felt somehow like the way of putting, that felt like if you imagine like a little tube where like up here it's like a trans person's experience and you have to like, has to get like twisted around a bit in the blender to then become sensations that can become movement. Like that was what we kind of worked with, because it it is hard to go from something super abstract, like being looked at or being trans or feeling ridiculous about being trans, and then like convert it to looking at or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like another like translation or refraction process that just happened because I needed someone to help me choreograph it and like see it being on the side.
Right.
But I guess you're asking about dance in general.
Yeah, and I mean, well, I was actually really interested in, I'm glad you talked about the window stuff because that was like, I had flagged that to be something I wanted to ask about. There is like something really particular in the sort of knowing that the first video is about these themes and then the way that it gets brought up both in the narrative and then also in what's happening to the figure and her movement throughout the video. Like, and I'm thinking about like the kind of first moment when she's on the ground and she's sort of in a, is it like nylon, something like, and then to the scene where she's in a dress and she's sort of dancing and being like in a sort of like heterosexual dyad of an invisible man. And then to the end where she's like the invocation of wanting to be treated like the stepmother treats you.
Yeah.
And I think it is such a stunning, like, or the process you described of being like, here's all of the sensations, here's like this conceptual experience of transition into these movements that are very, I found the movements in that video to be really like evocative, like kind of visceral to watch, even when they're like a little, even when it's funny, even when she's like dancing, and it's like I think the part with the foot, the Achilles heel is very funny, but it also is like a little like, ugh.
Yeah.
Really good.
That's good to hear because, like I said, I haven't watched that movie with people, and so I think that it's horrible. Like every time I watch it, I'm like, this is terrible. I think it's because I needed to feel other people watching it. So, which I think also says something about dance, which is that it can be so much, and then also you're like, it's nothing. Like I'm just up there like wiggling around, and what does that signify? But then it can mean so much, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm glad you brought the heterosexual dyad and stuff like that. Like, being on the screen. And yeah, I think a lot of the force of it or the muscle in it, like the kind of just like tension of the movements, but I think is maybe what you're speaking to, just kind of how, even though they're simple, like what's going on feels like it's happening with a great deal of resistance or something. I think a lot of that also speaks to Hiroko's particular movement style and what she like put together for me to do. And I like gave her these sensations, like it wasn't to move with great grace and ease and flow, it was to like really like which I think was a take on Cinderella that really like fit the vibe of the video also, because like the Disney Cinderella would have been much more like twirly and free.
Totally. Will you talk about like the figure of the director in the first video?
I think, yeah. I mean, similar to a lot of the choices, it just happened. You know, it wasn't like supposed to line up with something in the real world, but I guess it was to partially to extend the idea of being looked at to someone who has who has power,
Right.
you know, who's like making a decision, and in a way that feels, you know, really directly linked to the Academy Awards. You know, like how do you end up winning the Academy Awards?
Right.
A director has to choose whatever.
Right.
There's also something like chaser-y about the director.
Mm-hmm.
Like the
The
way.
shoe being small.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the big feet. Like something about him vilifying the character as soon as she steps in the audition room, but then also wanting her, choosing her. Kind of the anger and awe thing you're saying when someone calls a trans person, like
Right.
the desire that's there, and then also the kind of condescension. Is that enough? Condescendingness, or that's part of that desire. Like you should be so lucky that I would choose to want you or something.
Right.
So I think that power and balance just felt really hot. And like something to work with. And to kind of keep it within the, vaguely thematic Hollywood thing that's going on.
Right.
Yeah. And like being like hired or being accepted or being validated is this thing that like I feel myself wanting all the time and trying to pass. Like I want to get as gendered as possible, when I hear the ma'am or the ladies or whatever it is, and like that kind of always feels like that nod, like getting cast in a role or something, like getting the part. So I feel like director.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I've been thinking about that a lot lately in my own life, like the psychological experience of wanting an authority figure to say that you're okay, and the way that kind of dovetails with trans experience in these different ways. And having this like recursive thing with myself of being like, oh, was I already obsessed with this before I transitioned, or was it actually like did I like find this path in part because it then creates opportunities over and over again to test, like, am I being accepted, am I being fucked with, like, is there, but I think that, like, there's something about it that's so particular and pervasive, especially, like, in capitalism, where you're, like, well, anytime you're doing work, you're, like, at risk of being fired, like, anytime you, like, are renting an apartment, you're at risk of being kicked out, like, the world is, like, being guarded against you, and you have to sort of get through these different things in order to access basic resources all the time. So it's like, it becomes in some ways like eroticizing that relationship is like a way of making it more cheerful, or at least like more compelling to try to get access to something.
Yeah, and there's something about it with the element of passing that's like specifically not getting what you want without asking for it feels the best most of the time. But especially when it comes to passing, where it's like, if I have to state, whatever it is, my pronouns are correct, whatever it is, it feels less like successful or something. Like it's not an element of secrecy necessarily, but it's like an element of I guess self, and I guess it is kind of secrecy in a way that feels like the sweetest, and like probably that should get troubled and broken down, and like totally, I'm sure whatever, one day in my own life it will, but for now, like that's where I'm like,
Of course.
I mean, on the phone also you were saying how like keeping your life as a writer separate from your life as a therapist has like replicated this like need to not disclose or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like how it's like just chasing like opportunities to, I don't know, not like hide a part of your identity, but just to create like secret lives within secret lives within secret lives.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm starting. I recently had this experience where I was on a call with all these other therapists, and they all had their pronouns in their bios, and they were all cis. And I was like, I don't want to put my pronouns. I want you all to just know that I'm she, her, without thinking about it. And I feel annoyed that the expectation is that I would do that, and that one of you is not going to know that I'm trans and is going to be like, where are your pronouns? And it works so hard. Yeah, exactly. Like the fantasy, it's like all spun out of, exactly. Getting there. I think something that's also really in Haughty Child, like one of the things that's also really particular about it, that's similar to like Twin Achievement, but also very different, is this way that the speaker is telling this story like in the past. Like I had this experience. It was part of like my arrival where I am now, but it's so in the past, and it's so like it was like a formative moment that is now like we can like look at from a distance or something. And I wondered if that was like expressing a wish also for you to be like, this thing is, whatever this chunk of experience in my life is also something that I get to like have some vantage and distance from.
I think so, I think Haughty Child was like a little bit me feeling, yeah, like this hunger to put the like before, like which you can't actually put in a box and like put in your bed, but that's like what I wanted to aspire to or something. Yeah, so I wanted to role play being able to do that, I guess. And like Cinderella is such, you know, she's such a start. She can never go back. So that's it. But yeah, it feels still out of reach maybe. I mean, maybe it always will be, and that's the thing. Like, I think you have to be literally delusional to forget it all, which maybe that's the goal. Just like, be able to yourself. Like, I was born a girl, it's all over with. You know, gaslight your parents, just do them. But until that's an option, yeah, it feels like maybe the goal is to get away from that desire at all, but I was kind of trying to like work through that. Like, what is it that I find so icky about the incongruence of things? Because in so many other realms of life, I'm like, I love ambiguity. I love, you know, whatever, beyond the binary, like expansive, whatever, you know. And it's like, when it comes to my literal self, I'm like, no, I want there to A and B, and like absolutely done with it, and now we're in the after. So it's like I don't have that tolerance for ambiguity within my own experience of myself, and certainly how other people like look at me. And I don't think that's true. That's not true of all trans people, but I feel like a lot of binary, if anyone identifies as binary, a lot of trans women who I'm close to have shared is similar kind of yearning or something. And it's interesting to feel yourself as someone who's always been like whatever, thinking outside of black and white, it's 100 years or whatever, and then suddenly you're like, no, actually on this one point of my life, I absolutely want no ambiguity. Like I want it to be very engaging.
Definitely. And it's a funny, I think it's something that's softened for me over the years, but I think in a different part of my transition, I was much more like reactive towards other trans people who I felt like were trying to ask me to be like doing gender fuckery or like queering gender, and I was like, yeah, like gender is queer, but, and I like know that the story of my life and this historical moment is like about this turn in culture where like everything becomes hazy, but it's really important to me specifically that it's really clear that it's actually not ambiguous at all.
Yeah.
And there's something that's very dissonant about that, because I feel very, what you said really resonates with me, like I'm very like, complexity, like everything is ambiguous, but I'm like not me on this thing. And I think I also like softened around that for myself a little bit over through time of just being like, yeah, it's like in these spaces or moments, I think sometimes when I encounter someone who's really not super comfortable with trans stuff, and they're like, you just are a cis woman basically, right? You're exactly a cis woman. I'm like, well, it is weird. Like it is like yeah. And I think a little bit it's happened in sometimes doing clinical work when I'm working with a patient, and it's easier to not engage. Like when someone is like not clocking me and is perceiving me as cis, I'm like, this is really comfortable, and it's like what I've always wanted or something. But I know that the truth is weirder, and so it's like, and sometimes there's like a kind of fun in the space for me of passing, which is always like flickering, is always like how you know what's happening. There is this moment of being like, oh, I get to hold the ambiguity for myself, and it's private and it's just mine. Then it can be like my own, that's like my special secret, you know. But then the candle gets blown out in the moment, and the person's like, oh wait, like I can see you, like you just stood up and you're like a head taller than me or whatever, you know, like whatever the thing is.
Yeah. Do you feel also, I mean, sometimes fully passing leads to more fear for me, because then I'm bracing myself in a moment, you know, for that candle getting blown out or whatever, and that's almost scarier than never having, you know, like if you haven't disclosed that you're trans and everything's like if I haven't disclosed that I'm trans and everything's going well, in a way that's spookier than walking into a space where I've already introduced myself as trans, whether it's just like, you know, my work is up for, you know, whatever to be, or I'm like gonna be with people I know, whatever it is, if I'm going with strangers and I like don't know what they know, in a way it's like, it is spookier, because you're like, well, there's more to lose in a way.
Yeah, it's a lot of different things at once. And the fear, I think, sometimes in professional spaces it feels a little safer because it's like, I don't really think someone's gonna like attack me across the like folding table in the fluorescently lit room of the office building. But I think in going out situations, it's definitely can be a little more like, what's the vibe, or like, how do you know you're safe if people are like, oh, you're like a nice girl,
Yeah. Do you find yourself applying, maybe not like therapist training, but psychology to your own thoughts on this? Like,
No. I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's this like idea in psychology of like splitting something off and casting it out, which is like a important part of transitioning in a way, is to like split off and cast out the part of how people are perceiving you that you don't want, and to split off and cast out part of your experience of ways people treated you in your life that you don't identify with or you don't want to be. And then also like what we're talking about, like the discomfort with then there being ambiguity or like being sounding or seeming masculine in a moment and like doing the thing that like comes off a certain way, and the thing that you were sort of trying to get away from seeps back in or gets reflected back to you. And it's there's something that is very distressing about that experience of having the thing you kind of were like, that's not me, I'm not dealing with that. Or I don't want to be that, I don't want to be seen that way, returning, or and I think that's true for like an array of different kinds, like it's like people who are like, I don't identify with this part of my family, that's not me, I don't connect with that, and then having some moment where you're like, oh, I actually am exactly like my like parent, and I'm like, that's horrifying, it's a very, I think that's a common psychological experience for like parts of ourselves that we don't like, don't want to look at, don't want to feel inside of us.
That makes me feel good for you to link it to something that feels universal, because I often, can get into this really negative place where I'm like, I don't know, but especially I think living in the Bay Area, which is so trans in many ways, or like you can choose to live a life here that's extremely trans, but then there's also such a hippie strain of like, and I feel like you even talk about this in your book, like your second wave feminist mom or whatever, with people kind of who are just like across the board, like anti-plastic surgery, like embrace your body, like, whatever, change your internal experience, not your external, whatever. And so sometimes I can, when I'm in those kinds of more woo spaces, I can really pathologize myself for not being comfortable with how my body would be if I hadn't fruit. Like, so that you get, but those woo people have also made choices to like change how they identify and how they show up, even if it's not hormones and surgery.
Yeah, I think there's something cool about hippies having to deal with biohacking as like a thing that we're all doing all the time in all these different ways.
Yeah.
And my second wave feminist mom, who shortly before I got my kids done was like, actually, like I did know someone once who got a boob job after she went through menopause, and it made her really happy to have breasts again. And I was like, but I was like, oh yeah, you're trying to connect, you're trying to figure out how to get into a place where like you're something you've allowed for, made permission for, like granted, deemed legitimacy, but also being
right. And like, that's specifically interesting territory for her to go to, because I feel like so many of like our hormones were first developed for menopausal women. Like they weren't tested on us; they were tested on and I guess it's a meme at this point, or like an infographic, but I feel like most gender affirming healthcare is for cis people, it's for men with testosterone deficiencies or women who are postmenopausal or have breast cancer, whatever it is, and then they can then get turned off and used for trans people as well. Yeah, it's interesting that that's like a threshold. Yeah.
I know it's also such an interesting, or what you're saying makes me think about this thing that I think about a lot, about like our particular like trans tipping point generation of women aging into like middle and older adulthood, and like the excitement of being like a hot girl in her 20s versus being like, oh yeah, when I'm like 49, I might be like, damn, this is like pretty rough. Like 49-year-old men get treated pretty well compared to me. And the strangeness of knowing that that awaits, or like thinking about what it will be like to be trans and be like all of my friends who are cis women going through menopause, like that, which will have, like the idea of our generation aging, I think about a lot. And also like, I do too connected to this theme around like being a diva, or being like, I'm so fat, I'm so excited, like, people have to pay attention to me, and be like, what will that be like when I'm old, and what will that be like for like all of the different girls I know with all of their different flavors of wanting attention or validation around the ways that it like is also just like humiliating to be transgender in transphobia. And be like, oh yeah, how are we gonna age with dignity at all? What the fuck is gonna happen? But also like that's like one part of it, and then I think the other part of it is like what the magic of it will be, or like the magic, the part of me that did grow up in really hippie culture and is like, oh yeah, like Asian women are like extremely powerful, they're extremely wise, they're like actually like the like sexiest and strangest and most special people on earth. And yet like what it will be like to also get to age into like that crone power as a trans person is like kind of exciting and strange.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if like 50-year-old me will look back at 28-year-old me being like, oh, like people won't stop looking at me like I don't want to be looked at, and then she'll be like, bitch, you're now. Yeah, but I don't know. Also, I think the Kardashians are single-handedly changing like what age is old. So we'll be like full cyborgs.
Well, I also think there's this thing in Europe where it's like old people are allowed to have sexuality. Like if you go to like a nightclub or you go to like a bathhouse and you're like, oh yeah, there's like people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are like feeling themselves. And it's like in the US, it's sort of like this like Adam Sandler jackass like butt of a joke, the idea that an elder would have sexuality. It's supposed to be like grotesque and comical. And I think in Europe and in a lot of other places too, it's sort of like actually just hot.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like a cultural shift I want to see among many others.
Yeah.
Is to be like, oh yeah, you can like be old and have sexuality, and it's actually like sexual.
Yeah, totally. I'm wondering if we should check the time to think about Q&A. Oh, we're overtime.
Wait, you were spending on it.
Oh.
That's great. But yeah, we want to open up to a couple audience questions. We should do that. Unless there's any.
I mean, I would love to, I heard Hannah reflect a lot on your videos, but I would love to hear you reflect on like Hannah's seesaw
Mm-hmm.
at a museum maybe as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is like your book is very sewn into the time of my life that I was writing the text for these. So it feels like so connected to this project in general. And I think of the seesaw metaphor like a lot in my life because I think it is so relatable for me personally, I guess. Like I don't know. Well, I mean, it's hard not to go too deep with the seesaw. But I guess especially when I was reading the book and feeling so at odds with how everyone else, most people around me were seeing me, it's like for me that failure to pass like was the garbage on the seesaw or whatever. And specifically the image of you behind your friend, like strapped into the stirrups too, and like kind of holding your friend down is such a, I don't know, it's just such a visceral kind of feeling where like sometimes you literally are like, oh, someone else is like clawing me back down to keep the seesaw from flying up, and to feel, I don't know, I think it's, I feel like that section of your book is so powerful because it's so like raw, and also it is like still like really taboo to talk about suicidal ideation like at all, but also for you to be the one in that specific anecdote or the specific excerpt that you read, for you to be the one holding someone else down rather than the one who's about to fly up also makes it really like a piece of writing or something. Because I think that is, and we focus mainly on tonight, in our conversation, we focus mainly on the individual experience of transition and how you think about yourself, how you think about your own emotions, and but it is also such a communal experience of like taking turns like holding people down on the seesaw. And whether that's all trans people or also like people who are your friends who aren't trans, but just feeling that kind of like daisy chain of people making sure that no one flies up into the like black hole in the ceiling feels really and that's like, I feel like the context from which these videos are able to be made, if that makes sense, even though they are about my individual like psychic experience of passing or not passing. It's like born of being past that enough to talk about it, and that only happens if you have people to like pin you down. It's a good question.
Anyone else? I guess I'd like to end with one last question, which is just if you could talk a little bit about the book that is about to come out. And then also, Hannah, I heard that you're doing some writing. I wonder if you're working on any projects or anything that you'd like to share, upcoming things. So
Yeah, Frank here in the front row, and I have been at work for I think literally 12 months on this. It's like a companion to Lifetime Achievement, the second video that you saw. So it's gonna be about the size of a CD case. You can flip through it. It's gonna be, it has like the text of the work, and then also all these gorgeous photos that Frida styled and Mariah Tiffany shot that were kind of connected to the world of it's kind of supposed to be like a physical object that you can take away from the video, like a companion piece, I guess. And you can pre-order it using the QR code outside. And I'll get to when we finish it, which will be very soon. Yeah, like next month, I think. Exactly. And that's me. What are you working on?
I feel like a lot of, I mean, this part of being in grad school for many, many years where I just get to stop taking classes this last semester. So I feel like I'm in this point of like digesting all of this really fucked up stuff I had to like memorize and like endorse. And I think I'm kind of on the precipice of a bigger writing project about the discipline of psychology and what is so, how it's like freaky it is. But I'm in the part of like, I'm pretty early in the process of writing, so I'm like have a lot of really big swirly ideas and an allergy to writing too conceptually. So I'm trying to figure out how to like write like this, like really experientially and about my like close to the grain of my experience, about a lot of stuff that's pretty abstract or like intellectual history of like where did the construct of personality come from, and then also like how do you write about that in a way that's like connected to what I actually like to write about, which is like doing drugs with your friends. So big TBD. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. And Hannah's book is also, you can buy it with the QR code outside. So on your way out, there's plenty to do. So, anything else?
I just want to say thank you to Slash for hosting this event and also for putting that exhibition up. It means a lot. I'm really, really grateful grateful.
We're
Yeah,
so happy
it's all
that you
good.
applied to Omaha. We're like very honored. Yeah. And it'll be up through August 20th. So if you all want to come back and sit with the videos, and there's a little installation in there too, definitely come back and then see the other shows too. And we're just so honored that have had you both here tonight. It was really a special event. And we recorded it and we'll kind of compile that and it'll be available online. So that you can share it with other people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.